When he said it, the words cut through me like shards of glass. I want a divorce. I'm going to marry your sister. He didn't flinch, didn't even blink. It wasn't a plea or a question. It was a declaration, as if he'd rehearsed it 1,000 times in his head, perfecting every syllable for maximum devastation. I could barely breathe. The air felt thick and suffocating, pressing down on me as if the universe itself was conspiring to crush me. I remember staring at him, trying to process if I'd heard him correctly. Maybe he'd misspoken, or I was hallucinating. But his face, calm and resolute, told me he meant every word. The man I'd built my life with, my husband of 7 years, the father of the future I thought we were still building together, was tearing it all apart with a single sentence. And then there was my sister, standing there in the doorway of our kitchen, her eyes downcast, cheeks flushed with guilt. She couldn't even meet my gaze. Emma, my baby sister, my confidant, the one I had protected from bullies and heartbreak her entire life. The betrayal hit differently when it came from her. It wasn't just a knife in the back. It was a blade twisted in slow motion, ripping through every bond we'd ever shared. I didn't cry, not at first. Shock has a way of muting emotions, wrapping you in a cocoon of numbness. How long? I managed to choke out, though my voice didn't sound like my own. 6 months, he said bluntly, like it was no big deal. It just happened, as if love was some accidental slip on an icy sidewalk. I looked at Emma, hoping for some explanation, some apology that might make it hurt a little less. But she just stood there, biting her lip, like a guilty teenager caught sneaking out past curfew. I could have screamed. I could have thrown something, maybe the coffee mug I was holding, or the heavy ceramic bowl on the counter. But I didn't. I simply walked out. I left the house, the marriage, and the life I thought was mine behind in that moment. The divorce was fast. He pushed for speed, eager to move on, and I was too broken to fight. Within a month, it was over. He and Emma got married in a courthouse ceremony not long after, the ink barely dry on our papers. They didn't even wait for the courtesy of time to dull the sting. I didn't attend, of course, but I heard about it through mutual acquaintances. They looked so happy together. Someone had the audacity to tell me. Happy. The word made me sick. For the next 4 years, I rebuilt my life from the ground up. It wasn't easy, but I forced myself to move forward. I switched jobs, moved to a new city, and joined a community choir just to fill the empty hours. Therapy helped, though the scars from that betrayal never fully healed. They became a part of me, reminders of what I'd lost and what I'd learned to live without. I heard snippets about their lives now and then. Emma got pregnant a year into their marriage, and they had a little boy. I ignored the twinge of pain in my chest when I heard the news. I should have been happy for her, but all I could think about was the life I'd planned with him, the family we'd dreamed of starting together. That dream wasn't mine anymore, and it never would be. Then, out of nowhere, he showed up at my door. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon, and I had been curled up on the couch with a book when the knock startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated before opening the door. And there he was, standing on my porch, soaked from the rain but looking every bit as confident as the day he broke me. "Can I come in?" he asked. I should have slammed the door in his face. Instead, curiosity, and maybe a lingering shred of unresolved emotion, made me step aside. He walked into my living room like he belonged there, dripping water onto my rug. I didn't offer him a towel or anything to drink. I just stood there, arms crossed, waiting for him to speak. "I've made a mistake," he said finally, his voice quieter than I remembered. I laughed, an ugly, bitter sound that came from deep inside me. "You don't say?" "I need to explain," he continued, ignoring my sarcasm. "It's about Emma." "And the boy?" At the mention of their son, something in his tone shifted. It wasn't anger or frustration, it was fear. My stomach tightened. "What about him?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He hesitated, rubbing his hands together like he was trying to warm them up. "He's not mine." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and shocking. I didn't know what to say. "I found out a few weeks ago," he said, his eyes darting around the room, avoiding mine. Emma finally admitted it. She had an affair. The boy, he's someone else's. For a moment, I felt like I couldn't breathe. Not because I cared about his heartbreak, I didn't, but because of the cruel irony of it all. He'd thrown me away, torn our life apart, to be with her.
And now?
She'd betrayed him in the same way. Why are you here? I asked, my voice cold. Do you want my sympathy? My forgiveness? He shook his head.
No.
I don't know where else to go. I've lost everything. For a split second, I felt sorry for him. But then I remembered who I was, what he'd done, and how hard I'd fought to reclaim my life. I wasn't about to let him drag me back into his mess. You lost everything, I said slowly, meeting his eyes. Because you chose to destroy it. That's on you, not me. He didn't say anything, just stood there, looking like a man who'd finally realized the weight of his own mistakes. I walked to the door and opened it wide. Goodbye, Jason. He hesitated, as if he might try to argue, but he must have seen the finality in my expression. Without another word, he stepped outside into the rain. I shut the door, locked it, and stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. The past had come knocking, but it wasn't welcome anymore. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. For the next few days, Jason's visit gnawed at the edges of my mind. I replayed his words, the look on his face, the unexpected crack in his carefully curated composure. Jason, the man who'd once held my heart and then shattered it with callous ease, was now the one unraveling. And while I didn't miss him, not in the way I used to, I couldn't ignore the ripple effect of his confession. Then one morning, I received a text from Emma. I need to see you. Please. Just 3 words, and yet they carried the weight of our fractured history. My sister hadn't reached out to me in years. Not since the wedding that I couldn't bear to attend. Not since I'd walked away from our family gatherings to spare myself the agony of seeing them together. For her to contact me now, out of the blue, was as jarring as Jason's unexpected visit. Fine, I replied. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. My place. When Emma arrived, she looked different, haggard, as though the years hadn't been kind to her. Her once bright, carefree demeanor had dimmed, replaced by a nervous energy that made her fidget constantly. She barely waited for me to close the door before blurting out her reason for coming. Jason told you, didn't he? She said, her voice trembling. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. If you mean the part where he admitted the kid isn't his, then yes. He told me. Emma winced, her cheeks flushing with what I assumed was guilt. It's not what you think, she started, but I cut her off with a bitter laugh. Isn't it? Because it sounds exactly like the kind of mess you create, Emma. You lied to him for years, and now it's blowing up in your face. Her lips quivered, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But instead, she straightened her spine, her eyes locking onto mine with a mix of desperation and determination. I didn't come here to defend myself. I came here because I need your help. Helps. The word came out sharper than I intended. You're joking, right? It's about Leo, she said quickly, as if saying his name might soften me. He's not Jason's, but he's still innocent in all of this. He's your nephew, and he keeps asking about you. I felt a pang of something. Regret? Sadness? I didn't know. I'd never met Leo, and yet his existence had haunted me ever since I heard about his birth. He was a living reminder of everything I'd lost. My marriage, my family, my sister's loyalty. Why would he ask about me? I asked, my tone guarded. I've told him about you, Emma admitted. I showed him pictures. He knows you're his aunt, and he's been asking why you've never come to see him. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent years avoiding Emma and Jason, cutting them out of my life to protect myself. But in doing so, I'd also cut ties with an innocent child who had no part in their betrayal. What do you want from me, Emma? I asked, my voice quieter now. I want you to meet him, she said, her eyes pleading. Just once. He deserves to know his family, and I think it would mean a lot to him.
To both of us.
I stared at her, torn between anger and the tiniest flicker of compassion. She looked so small, so unlike the confident, carefree sister I'd grown up with. And as much as I wanted to hold on to my resentment, I couldn't deny the tug of curiosity about the boy who carried our shared blood. Fine, I said finally. But don't expect this to fix anything between us. Emma nodded, relief washing over her face. Thank you, she whispered. The meeting was set for the following weekend. I spent the next few days agonizing over what to expect, how to act, what to say. Would Leo even like me? Would I see traces of Jason in him, or would he remind me of Emma, the sister I'd once adored and now barely recognized? When the day arrived, I found myself pacing the living room, my nerves frayed. The sound of Emma's car pulling into the driveway made my stomach twist, and I had to force myself to breathe deeply as the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Emma standing there, holding Leo's hand. He was smaller than I'd imagined, with big brown eyes and dark, curly hair that reminded me of my own as a child. He looked up at me with a mix of curiosity and shyness, clutching a small toy car in his free hand. Hi, I said awkwardly, crouching down to his level. You must be Leo. He nodded, his grip on Emma's hand tightening. Are you my aunt? He asked, his voice soft but clear. I am, I said, smiling despite my nerves. It's nice to finally meet you. Leo studied me for a moment, then broke into a shy smile of his own. Mom says you're really nice, he said, holding out his toy car for me to see. Do you like cars? It was such a simple, innocent question, and yet it nearly broke me. This little boy, untouched by the messiness of the adults around him, was looking at me with pure, untainted curiosity. I do, I said, taking the car and pretending to inspect it. This one's pretty cool. Is it your favorite? He nodded enthusiastically, launching into an explanation about how fast it could go and how it always won races against his other toys. As he spoke, I found myself relaxing, the tension easing as I listened to his chatter. For the first time in years, I felt a connection, not just to him, but to something bigger. A sense of family that I thought I'd lost forever. Emma watched us from the couch, her expression unreadable. I didn't know what the future held for our relationship, or if we could ever repair the damage between us. But in that moment, as I sat on the floor playing cards with Leo, I realized that some wounds, no matter how deep, could start to heal in the most unexpected ways. The days after my first meeting with Leo were a blur of emotions I couldn't quite name. His bright eyes, his unfiltered excitement, and the warmth of his tiny hand in mine haunted me in the best way possible. For so long, I had closed myself off to anything that might pierce the armor I'd built around my heart. And yet, in a single afternoon, this boy, my nephew, had managed to undo so much of that guardedness. Emma didn't linger after our visit. She thanked me quietly, her gratitude sincere but restrained, and took Leo home. I watched them drive away, feeling a strange mix of longing and apprehension. I told myself it was enough, that I'd done my part by meeting him. But the truth was, Leo had already begun to carve out a place in my life, one I wasn't sure how to fill or manage. 3 days later, Emma called again. Leo won't stop talking about you, she said, her voice tinged with a mix of amusement and exhaustion. He wants to know when he can see you again. I hesitated, caught off guard. Emma, I don't know if I'm ready for her. Please, she interrupted, her tone more urgent now. He's been through so much lately. Jason leaving, the questions I can't answer. You're the only stable thing he's latched onto in all of this. Stable. I almost laughed. Emma, I'm anything but stable. You of all people should know that. She was silent for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer. I know I've hurt you, more than I can ever make up for. But Leo doesn't deserve to suffer because of my mistakes. He sees something in you, something good. Please don't take that away from him. I wanted to say no, to push her and this situation back into the neatly walled-off part of my past where it belonged. But the thought of Leo's face, his shy smile and earnest curiosity, was enough to weaken my resolve. Fine, I said, sighing. Bring him by on Saturday. That Saturday, I prepared as if I were hosting royalty. I cleaned the apartment from top to bottom, stocked up on snacks I thought a 5-year-old might like, and even unearthed a dusty box of my childhood toys from the attic. When the doorbell finally rang, I felt a nervousness I hadn't experienced in years. Leo bounded in ahead of Emma, clutching a small backpack and a book he insisted on showing me immediately. It was about dinosaurs, his latest obsession, according to Emma, and he spent the next 20 minutes regaling me with facts about the Tyrannosaurus rex and velociraptors. His enthusiasm was infectious, and before I knew it, we were sprawled out on the living room floor, drawing our own versions of prehistoric creatures. Emma watched us from a distance, her expression unreadable. She seemed almost hesitant, as if she wasn't sure where she fit into this dynamic she had orchestrated. Eventually, she excused herself, claiming she needed to run some errands. "I'll be back in a couple of hours," she said, looking at me pointedly. "If that's okay?" I nodded, though the thought of being alone with Leo made me a little nervous. What if I said the wrong thing? What if he got bored or upset? But as the door closed behind her, Leo tugged on my sleeve, holding up his half-finished drawing of a stegosaurus. "Does this look right?" he asked, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It's perfect," I said, smiling. "You're really good at this." He beamed, the kind of pure, unfiltered joy that only a child can express, and I felt my heart soften a little more. Over the next 2 hours, Leo and I built a Lego fortress, played a very loose version of hide-and-seek, and shared a snack of apple slices and peanut butter. He was a chatterbox, full of questions and observations that ranged from the profound, "Why do stars shine?" to the hilarious, "Do you think dinosaurs would like pizza?" At one point, as we were stacking Legos, he looked at me with a seriousness that caught me off guard. "Why doesn't Jason live with us anymore?" he asked. The question hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. I set down the Lego piece I was holding, trying to think of how to respond. "Sometimes," I said carefully, "grown-ups make decisions that don't always make sense to kids. But it doesn't mean they don't love you." Leo considered this for a moment, his little face scrunched in thought. "Mom said he didn't want to be my dad anymore," he said quietly. My heart clenched. I wanted to tell him that wasn't true, that Jason's failings had nothing to do with him. But the truth was, I didn't know what Jason had told Emma, or how much of it Leo had overheard. "Leo," I said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "None of this is your fault, okay? You're an amazing kid, and anyone would be lucky to have you in their life." He looked up at me, his eyes wide and searching. "Do you mean that?" "Of course I do," I said, pulling him into a hug. He melted into me, his small arms wrapping tightly around my neck, and in that moment, I felt a fierce protectiveness I hadn't known I was capable of. When Emma returned, she seemed surprised to find Leo curled up on the couch next to me, fast asleep. She gave me a questioning look, but I just shook my head, signaling that it wasn't the time to talk. After she carried him out to the car, she lingered on the doorstep, her expression conflicted. "Thank you," she said finally. "For today?" I nodded, unsure of what to say. The truth was, I wasn't doing this for her. Not entirely. Leo had awakened something in me, something I didn't fully understand yet. As I closed the door and leaned against it, I realized I was in deeper than I'd anticipated. Leo wasn't just a child in need of an aunt. He was a bridge to a part of myself I thought I'd lost. And for the first time in years, I felt the stirrings of something I couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe, or a sense of purpose. But beneath it all was a gnawing unease. Emma's secrets had already unraveled so much of my life. What else was she hiding? They came to me again. This time it wasn't just Emma. It was Leo, too. He missed me, or so Emma said. He'd asked if he could visit, and how could I refuse? I had been avoiding them for days, but seeing that boy's smile, the same one who had no idea about the mess his life had become, it tugged at my heart. I knew I had to listen to Emma. She came in quietly, her eyes carefully avoiding mine. Leo ran ahead to the living room to play, his laughter echoing in the background. There was a tension in the air, thick and palpable. Emma sat down on the couch, and I waited for her to speak, feeling the weight of this conversation before a word had even been said. "I need to tell you something," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I could hear the guilt, the anxiety in her tone. I've been carrying this secret for so long. I can't keep it hidden anymore. I said nothing. I had already suspected what was coming, but I needed to hear her say it. I didn't tell you everything before, she continued, her voice cracking. You know how hard it was for Jason and me to have a child. We tried for so long, but it never happened. And I realized the problem was with him. He couldn't have children. And I couldn't lose him. I couldn't let him walk away. The room seemed to spin as she spoke. I knew what was coming, but hearing it still hit me like a blow. So, she hesitated, eyes welling with tears. I went to a clinic. I had artificial insemination with donor sperm. I told him it was his. I convinced myself it was the only way to keep us together. I thought if he thought Leo was his, everything would be okay. I felt sick. All this time, I thought she had been unfaithful to Jason with another man, but this was even worse. Emma had lied about the very foundation of their family. You lied to him, I whispered, the words tasting bitter. I did, she replied, tears streaming down her face. I know it was wrong, but I thought it was the only way. I thought I could save everything, that if he thought Leo was his son, everything would work out. But now her voice trailed off, overwhelmed by the weight of her confession. And Jason didn't suspect anything? I asked, struggling to comprehend the extent of her deceit. She shook her head, but then her expression shifted.
He did.
After a couple of years, he started to notice things. Leo didn't look like him. The way he behaved, nothing seemed right. A few months ago, he had a DNA test done. He needed to know for sure. And when the results came back, she paused, her face contorted with shame. Leo's not his son. The silence between us stretched out, thick and suffocating. The man I had once trusted, the man who had loved Emma with everything he had, was the victim of her lies. And now, everything was falling apart. How could you? I finally asked, the anger rising within me. You let him believe that for so long. You let him raise a child that wasn't his, because you were afraid. Emma's face crumpled, her sobs filling the room. I didn't know what else to do. I thought if I told him, he'd leave. I thought I could fix everything if I just kept pretending. But now, it's all ruined. I can't take it back. I wanted to be angry with her. I wanted to scream at her for what she had done to Jason, for what she had done to Leo. But instead, all I felt was sadness. This wasn't just her failure. It was a failure of trust, of love, of everything they had built together. So, what happens now? I asked, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be. What are you going to do? Emma wiped her tears and sniffled. I don't know. I don't know how to fix this. I've already lost him. I've ruined everything. But I couldn't tell him before. I didn't want to lose him. I sat down beside her, feeling the weight of the situation settle in my chest. You have to tell him, Emma. You need to tell Jason the truth. He deserves that much. I know, she replied, her voice barely audible. I'll tell him. I will. I promise. You need to do it soon, I added. You can't keep hiding from this. You've lied for long enough. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. I knew Emma needed to do the right thing, but I wasn't so sure she could fix what had been broken. The trust, the love, everything was shattered. Jason had already been hurt more than I could ever understand. And now, Leo, he would have to find out the truth too. Emma nodded slowly. I'll do it, she whispered. I'll tell him. I'll make it right. But even as she said those words, I wasn't sure if it could ever be fixed. The lies had built a wall that couldn't be easily torn down. And whatever happened from here on out, I knew that none of us, least of all Leo, would ever be the same again.